Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of For Your Consideration, the podcast featuring roundtable discussion re-evaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm Dustin Friesenan.
And I'm Mike Josick.
Welcome to the show.
So this week's classic film selection is titled Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom.
AKA that movie that you make your friends watch when they've done something really abhorrent to upset you. You know what you did!
I'm in full agreement there. So just before we get to our discussion of the film, we are always saying if you leave any comments, we will read them on an upcoming show. Well, that time has come, ladies and gentlemen.
It has finally come.
We got a great comment on our YouTube channel by Javier Gil Vidal. And Javier said, in regards to our A Hard Day's Night episode, wonderful, educated, articulated, and well-argumented dialogue in which both parts have a point. Congratulations especially to Dustin, who dares challenge the mainstream of the vast majority, of which I am a member, who consider this film a masterpiece in every sense. He brings his point home very well, with excellent observations I will think about in the future. A class show.
And definitely something that's going to boost my ego a little bit. Not that that needed to happen. But thank you very much, Javier, and I hope that I can maintain a proper defense of my often
iconoclastic,
against the grain sort of opinion.
I'm quite actually pleased with this comment because it does sort of address, one of the things that we tried to do when we started this project, which is just to kind of challenge, the status of these movies and also just to have like really good discussions about them and to kind of be recognized for that.
I know we were looking forward to this one since I knew going in the kind of movie it was going to be and generally what my thoughts of that kind of movie was. I hadn't seen such a movie since we started doing this and I started looking at movies a bit more differently, so I was still trying to go in with as open a mind as possible, but I knew that Mike loved it, that I probably was going to disagree with him right off the huff, and that's why I was looking forward to doing it, so we'd have that good discussion back and forth there from both polar opposites.
So thanks again, Javier. That was really great of you to leave that comment for us. And just to remind everybody, we love your comments. So whether it's Facebook, on our YouTube channel, Instagram, Twitter, wherever we are, let us know what you think.
We do care. We listen.
All right, so let's get back to the film in question. We're going to roll the credits on this film and go direct into the discussion, because the sooner we're done this, the better. So, Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom, was directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. It was produced by Alberto Grimaldi. The screenplay was by Sergio Sidi and Pier Paolo Pasolini. It was based on The 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade. It starred Paolo Bonicelli, Giorgio Cataldi, Umberto Paolo Quintavalle, Aldo Valetti, Caterina Borato, Elsa De Giorgi, Hélène Surgère, Sonia Saviange, and Inez Pellegrini. Music was shockingly by Ennio Morricone. Cinematography was by Tonino Deli Colli, edited by Nino Baragli. It was distributed by United Artists, and it was originally released on the 22nd of November 1975 in Paris, the 10th of January 1976 in Italy, and the 19th of May 1976 in France. Wide release. The film, reception-wise. Despite being banned in many countries, this film does have its advocates. A 2000 poll of critics conducted by The Village Voice named it the 89th greatest film of the 20th century. The Chicago Film Critics Association in 2006 named Salò the 65th scariest film ever made, and the Toronto International Film Festival in 2010 placed it at number 47 on its list of the essential 100 films.
And as for the sight and sound, it ranked 202nd on the critics poll and 75th on the directors poll, marking it actually one of the highest rated films that we've done thus far.
So, Dustin, shall we go with your thoughts first on this film, since it was your idea?
I never wanted to see this film again until I saw that it was on that Sight and Sound list. And this is the exact reason you started this podcast.
Well, you did actually say that this was going to almost be like a borderline in case you were considering episode.
Absolutely.
A long-form version where you dragged me into it.
Because this is not a good movie in any sense of the word. It suffers on... I don't even know where to start on where it suffers. The music doesn't even make sense through a lot of it. But I can understand that they're trying to go with classical, trying to show that they're... If it's a jovial song, it's showing how they are enjoying what they're doing. If it's a classical song, it's showing how they're the elite, the bourgeoisie, the high class, the upper crust, which they bring up in the film that it is way better to be the upper crust than to be the non-subhuman or the subhumans that they're dealing with.
So much of this movie deals in contrasts, and I think the music is one of the more obvious.
But the plot itself doesn't even make much sense. A lot of what they're saying... Ostensibly, they're supposed to be... If you go with the Marquis de Sade, he honestly believes in what this movie would represent. That the suffering of another adds to my pleasure because someone else's pleasure takes away from my own. He believes that pleasure and happiness is a zero-sum game, effectively. So, through the torture and abuse of others, you can gain higher pleasure. At the beginning, they start with a random line that in excess, all things are good, and that's what the premise of this film effectively is. Now, critiques that I've read say that it's supposed to be almost a satire, and of course they say that the difference between satire and something that is honest and believable, it's a very fine line. And here I think that because it is written by the Marquis de Sade, who believes in it, you're not really treading that line to make it into a satire. It becomes a little more honest in what the movie's actually showing. But a lot of what they're saying in the movie doesn't even add up. You have these people talking about how to experience the greatest pleasure you also have to suffer some. You can't have one without the other. And I can believe in that. And I do believe in that you have to have some relativity in your life. In order to appreciate happiness, you have to experience some sadness. Otherwise, you become complacent. You have the first world problems issue where my Corvette wasn't the right color, therefore it's the worst day of my life sort of deal. You have to have some suffering in your own life to really appreciate beauty and happiness. But they'll talk about it. They'll say that you have to be both victim and perpetrator, and then they're never really the victims. They're always in power, as you were saying, that they always have the upper hand. They always are willing... when it comes to eating the shit, when it comes to being sodomized. At one point, one of the most grave sins, they're like, what's worse, to be a sodomite or to murder? Well, to be a sodomite is worse. Yeah, but you can only sodomize one person at a time. Like, it's all over the damn place.
You should probably clarify that during the watching of the film, one of the things that you and I had brought up to each other is, strangely, the film's lack of commitment to its idea. And you had pointed out that if... it was all about extremes and being the victim as well as the... what was the phrase?
Perpetrator?
The perpetrator as well as the victim. They should be suffering just as much as they're perpetrating these things on other people.
But it's not that. And this is where the argument for it being more of a satire or a parody comes in, because it's all about those in power using their power to whatever means. And they are 4 different types of fascist rulers. You've got a bishop, you've got the president, you've got a couple others. I can't even remember.
A duke and a magistrate.
A duke and a magistrate. And they're all just using their power to experience whatever pleasures they can. They call themselves pure libertines. They call themselves anarchists, even though they rely on that power structure to have everything that they do. They have their co-conspirators, and they've been planning this for years because they've been following these people whom they kidnap and torture and kill and rape.
And under Mussolini's fascist regime, they're allowed to enact this plan, this thing that they want to do.
And one thing that seems to constantly pop up is how any one of these horrible acts, nobody ever sort of disagrees with each other. They'll disagree over which ass is the nicest ass, but nobody's like, you know what? I don't think eating a old horrors, diarrhea from eating spoiled food is the ultimate of pleasures. Nobody's like, I don't like the smell of feces all over the place. All these people who are in these extremes, or these people who are in charge, they all enjoy the same thing for really no reason. They talk about all these other rich and powerful people that have visited these whores that are telling the story, and they all once again have these same tastes, and it's constantly brought up as being a good thing. Certainly, anyone who's not a co-conspirator, any of the prisoners, none of them agree. None of them are like, these people know what they're talking about a little bit. I'm finally getting to taste what the upper crust gets to. It doesn't much make sense, as far as I'm concerned, that they're talking about individual tastes, yet there are no individual tastes. Everything is always good because it's all excess, but only excess in the way they want.
Now, that might be part of the commentary, because the commentary of this movie, it's about abuse of power and fascism and the extremism of the libertines. And where I think this movie sort of fails is that we didn't actually get that from the film. We got that from reading analyses of the film.
Yeah.
And what other people have talked about. And I think that's the film's biggest failing, is that this is done exclusively from the point of view of the libertines themselves, the four guys who are in charge, and you don't get, I think, in a story where you're trying to point out the evil of individuals in power and the abuse of power, you need to hear from the people who are being oppressed or suffering under them. And none of the sons or daughters, which I believe is what they're called, the 9 boys and 9 girls that are selected for abuse, none of them really speak or have any agency or voice of any kind. And
the most agency they have is at the very end, when they start everybody selling each other out in a weird sort of one to the next,
which in itself
scenario.
Is so contrived, because every single person, I can't remember, I think it's the Duke who says he's got something to do, and he goes to one of the boys who says, be lenient on me and I'll give you a secret. And then every person he goes to after that goes, oh, I have a secret, which there's, other than to literally frame what's happening and to pick out a few people so that they can torture them in the courtyard later, like, there's no...
Well, the people being tortured in the courtyard are any who did anything against the rules at any point in time, trying to escape.
Anyone who got put in the book,
God
yeah.
in any point in... Which makes the bishop just seem really out of place. Like, if you're not allowed to reference God at any point, being a bishop seems a stupid vocation, I think. But alright, he's corrupt, fine.
And, like, the movie just starts. It starts, you had said to me that the plot was basically stated in the anything done in excess is good. And there's very little setup. There's very little to really, like, get your teeth into and sort of be taken on this ride. And I mentioned a little bit earlier when you were speaking that, ironically, one of the greatest failings of this movie is that it doesn't go far enough. Because one of the things was, narratively, the libertines really don't suffer anything, which I don't think kind of goes in line with what's sort of supposed to be happening. It goes more in line with, I think, what Pasolini is trying to say.
That they're hypocritical, at the very least.
Which possibly subverts the narrative more so than it actually drives the narrative or drives the commentary or the satire or whatever it is. And then when they're actually doing the stuff, I'm sure in 1975, this movie was banned pretty much everywhere. So yeah, it was extreme and it offended people. But honestly, other than a lot of gratuitous nudity and some sort of off-kilter scenes here and there, I mean, it's more boring than anything else. Its biggest sin is that this thing is boring as shit.
They're telling these stories that are so similar over and over and over. Somebody goes molests someone else off to the side, and it's 2 hours of your life that turns into 4 hours.
And you know what? Like, you mentioned the stories, and the whole point of the stories is to inflame passion in the libertines or in the guards or in the studs. And they do stuff. They grope people. They take, somebody's hand and use it to, like, rub against themselves. And there's no passion in this movie. I think the reason why it's boring, I mean, we said that we thought it was boring, and you said, does that say more about us or more about the movie? I think maybe both, but the reason why it's not really affecting us is because it lacks that passion, and without that passion, it doesn't have the power to unsettle us, because it all just feels very theatrical and very staged.
Especially the little skits people would do every now and then they'd laugh at their own jokes like it was the funniest thing in the world. Those are very theatrical, very boisterous, very, very fake.
And by not being able to live with any of the 9 boys or 9 girls, there's no sense of danger. There's no sense of peril. There's just this bizarre feeling. It's like watching a car crash where you don't know who was in the car crash. You don't know if they're living or dead. You know, you feel sort of a little weird and bad and voyeuristic, but ultimately you walk away and it doesn't affect your life in any way.
Certainly there are those who will disagree. I know that there's one director, I believe it was, whose mother brought him to this as soon as he turned 18, and he's like, it's the most influential film that I've ever seen in my life. But you have Alec Baldwin, one of the Baldwins, and another famous director who...
Alec Baldwin and Martin Scorsese advocated for the film when somebody had rented it from a gay bookstore, and they were, I think, an undercover police officer or something. It was deemed pornographic and excessive, and there was a trial, and Baldwin and Scorsese came to the defense of the film. And obscene. Obscene was the word that I was looking for, not pornographic. It should be noted that Scorsese has worked extensively with Dante Ferretti, who I believe was the production designer of this film. And Ferretti's done something like 8 movies or something with Scorsese, so I'm pretty sure that's why Scorsese sort of came to the defense. But
no,
again, that's...
for Baldwin.
But that also... Sorry, I don't know if I'm derailing your point, but that speaks to the point where we mentioned earlier about how we didn't get the message from the movie. We got the message from the work done after the movie and critics talking about it and debating it. I kind of feel like
even Eraserhead, we can get a full understanding of that movie. That made perfect sense to me this time around. Here, watching this, I'm grasping at straws to get the message that I was already told.
I kind of feel like the people who rally behind this movie are probably people who have read the commentary. I'd probably... There is a documentary out there that was made by Mark Kermode, who is a British film critic. He's done some interesting stuff with Alien and The Exorcist, 2 of my favorite films. I'd be curious to see his documentary. It's probably advocating for the film, but...
It would be interesting. I would honestly be interested in seeing it.
I'd be more interested in watching that documentary than ever sitting down with this movie again. To its credit, though, I refuse to do this without saying anything good about the movie. I even have good things to say about The Sixth Sense.
He acted well, Haley Joel.
I actually did appreciate, once we were about 2/3 into the movie, I appreciated the structure of it. I kind of liked the idea of you would get these stories. I wish the stories were more interesting, but you would get these stories, and it was a very sort of calm, controlled environment, and then you would get the debauchery sort of afterwards. The things that you would discuss in the room, you would then see the effect in a more sort of open environment. Now, I said the one environment was more controlled. As we've already stated, these guys never relinquish control. So, again, pointing out one of the major failings of the movie, like a broken record, this needed to be more anarchic. This needed to be crazier than it was. You needed to kind of, have your jaw hanging open and just thinking like, oh shit, what just happened? And never felt that. I did appreciate the structure. I did appreciate some of the things that Pasolini was trying to do at the end with the courtyard execution, torture scenes, and the voyeur in the room. Again, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that this was a movie very much about contrasts, and I wish he was more successful at it. I can see what he's trying to do stylistically. I don't think Pasolini succeeds. I'd almost be curious to see other Pasolini films just to see if he has a history of failing or if this was just he bit off more than he can chew.
I wonder a little bit about the editing myself because saying that we were bored and the tempo was very bad is especially in the storytelling scenes. One of them has everyone sitting around. Nobody looks excited. Everybody looks bored. And they're sitting there for 15 seconds.
Even the libertines look bored.
I think one maybe starts groping somebody a little bit until all of a sudden the storyteller's like, I've got a story. So you were all just sitting there, bored out of your minds for a little bit. This is not chasing all these extremes. There's nothing that you guys do for the first 3/4 of the movie that you probably haven't done a million times over and that you couldn't have done prior to this. I mean, I know it's not stated anywhere in the film, but in the original story by the Marquis de Sade, all the daughters have been abused in ways like this and even more throughout their entire lives. You've already got your victims. You have probably done so with many others. I mean, you've got already a huge following of these people. What's even the point?
Can you imagine how much more effective this movie would have been if the scenes with the storytelling were done very tight, very controlled, lockdown cameras, and they just built existential dread? Because as they're telling these stories, you know this is what's going to unfold, and you're not entirely sure how it's going to unfold, and you just were able to see the tension in the boys and the girls and everybody who kind of knew what was going to happen, and then it was just fucking bedlam.
And there was no tension in the boys and the girls. Like, a few of them have died at this point. Pretty early on, a few were murdered. And they look bored during these stories. They know what's going to happen to them. There's even the one guy who sort of gets a little bit into it and starts making out with the Duke a bit, but they seem bored more than anything else. You could say that they've been beaten down, but there's no real timeline given. Once again, the original story has it as going on for 4 months.
And you had said that each part of the film, each stage, I can't remember what they're called.
There was the stage of manias, the stage of shit, and then the stage of blood. And in the original manuscript, there's supposed to be 4 that slowly increase in severity. Here, it just goes from desire to feces to murder.
And again, there's no escalation, and there's no passion, and there's no sense of dread, existential or otherwise.
And they even talk about letting go half of them at the very end. And you don't know if that happened because all you get is Umberto gets bored, changes the radio station, and tries to dance with another guard. Done.
Well, they did say anybody who didn't get a blue ribbon had basically done their time and they can go back to Salò. But anybody who had the blue ribbon was going to get tortured and murdered, which was sort of their
punishment for not
But as far as the
following
libertines
rules.
were concerned, that was their denouement. That was their finale before, they went home. And I think having the 2 guards waltzing together and talking, oh, what's your girlfriend's name? Margarita. And they just kind of waltz. I think that was another sort of, despite the horror that was happening in the courtyard, these guys are just talking about going home. They've had their little vacation. And it's that, abuse of power, fascist thing. I think the ending probably hit that point home more than any other minute or second of this movie in the ridiculousness of it.
Because there, it was the only thing that, it was done entirely casually. So that works, whereas everything else needed more emotion.
But you don't feel uncomfortable in any of the violations that these people suffer. You don't feel uncomfortable when they're stripped naked and leered at by these old men who are going to commit vile acts against them. You don't feel uncomfortable. There's that scene where they're all being led around like dogs up the stairs, and I said to you, I will say that's a strangely, compelling image, just because it was something that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. But you don't feel the degradation of the acts. You don't feel... It's kind of like... This movie feels like the shorthand. You know what I mean? You don't see them put into the position of being like dogs. You don't feel the threat of what will happen to them if they don't act like dogs. When the president puts the nails in the bread or cake or whatever that was and feeds it to...
The one girl, she bites into it, bleeds some. Next scene.
And there's no consequence. And, at the least, after the middle part, I would have liked to have seen someone get pink eye. After handling all that shit. And they try to bring in some Nietzsche. They try to bring in some Baudelaire. They try to bring in, there's another philosopher whose name I can't remember. And
they throw out random bullshit philosophy to try to justify their point, which never works.
It's there to bolster the argument, but it doesn't work at all. And it slides by so quickly. It's just a fail, man. I was dreading watching this movie
For the wrong reasons?
For the wrong reasons, yeah. Like, I thought you were going to show me something that was truly unpleasant and despicable and horrible, and it wasn't. It was just such an artistic misfire and just a boring fucking movie.
If you want to watch something that's actually hard to watch, August Underground Mortem, probably. But don't watch that either. Not good movies. That one will appear on In Case You're Considering. Because that one did not get the critical acclaim this one did. Once again, this is why we started the podcast. To question why things like this are getting such critical acclaim. Have they seen this movie? I don't know that they have.
I do think it's interesting. You were thinking of including this movie as one of the installments of In Case You Were Considering, and then you found out it was on the Sight and Sound list, and you're like, Mike, we're doing this movie.
It was actually the other way around, but I figured it out while going through one day, and I was upset that it appeared on the list, and then more upset that it appeared so highly. But while listing movies, I was sitting there like, no, wait, this one's critically acclaimed. I can't just slough over this in a little mini episode. It deserves worse. It deserves 2 people calling it garbage.
When you say it's critically acclaimed, like, I think it needs to be pointed out. We mentioned where it rates as far as its position on the Sight and Sound list.
Toronto Film Fest.
Stuff like that. What we didn't say, because it wasn't really relevant, was that, like, Rotten Tomatoes reports 71% of the 28 surveyed critics gave the film a positive review. The average rating is 6.4 out of 10. Most of the people who voted for this movie on Sight and Sound rated it as, like, super high on their list of favorite films. TV Guide gave it a review of 2.5 out of 4, saying that despite moments of undeniably brilliant insight, the film is nearly unwatchable, extremely disturbing, and often literally nauseous. Interestingly, Roger Ebert had owned the Laserdisc for years, but hadn't actually watched it because of its transgressive reputation.
Did he give it a review without having seen it?
I don't think so. I'm just I'm picking stuff out of the
wiki.
The movie came out on Laserdisc in like 1993, and I think it was 2011 when Roger Ebert wrote that he hadn't watched it yet. So he'd been sitting on the thing for like 8 years without actually putting it in. And John Waters.
Frickin' John Waters.
I want John Waters' comment to be sort of the final thing here.
I don't even know what his comment is, but I don't approve of it already.
No, we won't approve of it. And director John Waters, who was a huge proponent of Faster Pussycat Kill Kill as well, he said that Salò is a beautiful film. It uses obscenity in an intelligent way, and it's about the pornography of power. And while I agree that the film is about the pornography of power, I don't think Pasolini manages to depict any of it in a beautiful way at all. Like, even if you get past, the quality of the print that we watched, I don't know if there's a better quality print out there, but, it's lacking technically as well as narratively in a few areas. Obviously, none of the sound was recorded, and I think this was typical of a lot of Italian films. None of the sound was recorded on set. It was all done in post. And it wasn't done very well, which I think also detracted from the film. There was more passion in some of the dialogue scenes than there was in the actual performances. Sorry, there's more passion in the dialogue being recorded than there was in the performances on screen.
And a lot of the performances were very, very poor, to say the least. At first, like, them shying away whenever they're being molested, that is the one thing that I honestly believe, that they kind of didn't want to have this grody old dude groping and kissing him. But other than that...
All right, well, I think we're just going to end up repeating ourselves here. I can't think of anything else that I'd really like to discuss about this movie. So I'm pretty sure we're going to have a brief judgment phase, which we will go into now. Dustin, is Salò or 120 Days of Sodom a masterpiece or a museum piece?
It is neither. It is a bad film. Not worth our time.
I will go so far as to vote it as a museum piece. I don't know a lot about my transgressive film history, but I don't think there were a lot of people who had done anything quite like this. I know Caligula came out in 79. This was 75 on this scale with this kind of material. I do think it's a strange but somewhat interesting cinematic artifact. So despite my not liking it as a film.
I don't even think it gets the credit for being, oh, hey, it was first one, because, once again, Un Chien d'Andalou from long before then, maybe Cannibal Holocaust came out before it. You had other sort of exploitative, violent films, and this one doesn't have, as you said before, it doesn't even go super far in any of it. So how transgressive is it? In its plot, sure, maybe, if it could hold a proper narrative that didn't contradict itself.
To be fair, Cannibal Holocaust came out in 1980, and Un Chien Andalou came out in 1929, but is like pure art film.
But that one specifically was made to upset the audience.
Yes.
Which is what transgressive filmmaking is about. So that one, if I'm going to blindly call something the transgressive first, that one would get my museum piece. This one does not.
No, I'm not giving it...
And I feel that it didn't even have the wide release or the credibility that Un Chien d'Andalou does in terms of transgressive filmmaking.
This movie is definitely more well-regarded, probably because it was banned. And a lot of times when you ban something, it creates a desire for something and you look for meaning in something. So, I mean, you can't go back and see what it would be like if this movie just came out and was, you know, had a mediocre European run and whatever. But I'm gonna at least go with the archivist historian slant and at least give it a museum piece.
Well, I'm gonna have to agree to disagree. There are other pieces that have done it better, doing the same thing around the same time or even beyond. Because a lot of the other reviews that were given for it were like in 2000, 2011, stuff like that.
So that leaves us with 1 vote for museum piece and 1 vote for museum piece of shit.
Mangia, mangia, mia diletta sposa. Devi rinforzarti. Mangia, devi rinforzarti per la notte d'amore che ci attende. Non c'è nulla di peggio che un alito privo di alcun odore.
Eva.
And that concludes our discussion of Salò, or 120 Days of Sodom. If you have any opinions on the film or our discussion or the show in general, let us know on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Follow, share, join.
And in case you were considering Salò, don't watch it.
We also have a blog on WordPress, wordpress.com/FYC show. We post reviews, essays, opinions. We also have a Patreon account. If you want to support us in producing more content like this, go to patreon.com/FYC show. Check it out. I think we have some interesting reward tiers set up. We'd love your support. And if you are not interested in supporting us financially, but you still kind of want to back us, share the Patreon page on your social media. Let your friends and other people know that it's out there. Perhaps they'll discover us and they will want to do so on their own. And if you get the show off of iTunes, while you're downloading, it only takes a minute. Rate and review the show. Any comments you guys make on the Facebook pages or the iTunes reviews, we will read those comments on a future show. And if you know anybody who uses iHeartRadio or Stitcher, the podcast is also available through those providers. And we also have a YouTube channel, which we would encourage you to check out. Occasionally we post some stuff on the YouTube channel that isn't strictly an episode, so it also has some validity. And that's it for all the promo stuff we have to do, so that pretty much brings the episode to a wrap. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you listening.
Until next time, I'm Dustin.
And I'm Mike.
Ta-ta.
Take care. Hello. Oh, were you about to do that? Go ahead.
I don't know why you were waiting for me the first time.
I thought you were going to say that.